Now, I've gone through every single Edexcel A-level maths past paper question that you can find online for this current syllabus, and I've done likewise with AQA. I've got a few more papers to go, but I've gone through most of the AQA past papers and analysed every question, and this is what I've noticed in terms of the differences between the two. So you may be wondering why you should even care in the first place, because you may be like, oh, I do AQA, why do I care about Edexcel? Well, the issue is this. The syllabuses, if you actually read the syllabuses of both AQA and Edexcel, they're virtually the same. I mean, it's literally the same UK government national curriculum that has to be followed by every UK exam board. It's just that different exam boards have different favourite topics. So I'll give you an example, right? AQA, they love statistics sampling questions. They love questions where they ask you 3 marks, describe how you could take a random sample of 20 students. Describe how you could take a stratified sample. They love those kind of questions. You barely see a question like that in Edexcel. They barely ask sampling method questions, right? So if you're an Edexcel student and you want more practice with sampling method questions, you may want to look at the AQA exams because there are just more practice questions on that topic in AQA. But it could still come up in the Edexcel syllabus because it's still in the Edexcel syllabus. Do you see what I mean? So sometimes with some topics that don't come up often in the past papers for your exam board, you actually may want to look at the other exam board and see some of those questions to get your practice. One of the big differences that I straight away noticed was that Edexcel, they love pure maths vectors. They love vectors questions in pure maths, you know, parallel vectors and calculating, like kind of like the GCSE vectors questions you would have seen at GCSE. They love that kind of stuff. AQA, out of the past papers I've seen, I have not seen a pure maths vectors question in AQA. All the vectors are kind of dedicated to mechanics. They've kind of moved everything in vectors in mechanics, and there's no pure maths vectors in AQA. Out of the ones I've seen so far. Again, I've got a few more to go, but from the ones I've seen so far, like all the pure maths vectors stuff is non-existent in AQA, is kind of moved to mechanics. Things like factor theorem, circle, seem to be pretty equal for both exam boards. With proof, what I noticed with AQA, what they like to do in AQA is they like to give you someone else's proof. So here's Bob's proof to prove that root 2 is irrational. And they give you the proof and then they say, what mistake did Bob make in step 2? And then correct step 3. So they get you to analyse other people's proofs. They like that in AQA. In Edexcel, normally they just say, off you go, prove this. Bye, good luck. Now, AQA seem to be really big fans of functions like domain and range, composite functions, inverse functions. They're really big fans of that. Like every year, you'll get a big question on that, like 3, 4, 5 parts of the question. Could be 15 marks worth of questions on that topic. In Edexcel, normally it's not that big. I mean, they tend to ask it most years, that topic, but it's nowhere near as big as the ones I've seen in AQA where you can get like these 6-part questions where they go through domain and range and composite functions. It's more rare in Edexcel. You need to know it. You definitely need to know it for Edexcel. Don't forget it, but it doesn't seem as big in Edexcel. Like another big AQA topic that they love in AQA is the Newton-Raphson method. Now, I'm recording this in November 2024. It's one of the last topics that you do in A-level maths. So you're watching this right now, you probably haven't seen that topic yet, but when you come on to numerical methods, that chapter in your course, you will see something called the Newton-Raphson method. It's probably like the most famous numerical method or iteration method that you can use to solve equations that you can't solve by algebra. So that's a really big one in AQA. They do ask it sometimes in Edexcel. What they tend to do in Edexcel, they tend to ask iteration numerical methods, but usually it's not the Newton-Raphson method, the famous one. But AQA like the famous Newton-Raphson method. But when you see that, you'll know what I'm talking about. Now, one thing that I can quite confidently say, looking at both the exam boards past papers, Edexcel integration questions on average are harder than AQA ones. Normally with AQA ones, they tend to tell you what method to do. So they'll say use integration by parts, use integration by substitution. A lot of the harder integration questions in Edexcel, they don't do that. They just say, here's the integral, bye, good luck. And also as well, I see that a lot of the Edexcel integrals and functions that you're supposed to integrate, they just look harder than the ones in AQA, generally speaking. I do see a couple of quite challenging AQA ones where I was like, oh, that's tough. But generally, I've seen more harder integrals in Edexcel overall, I would say. Now, both the exam boards love trig modelling. They love that topic, so you're going to have to get good at trig modelling. They both love exponential modelling. I've seen more quadratic modelling in Edexcel, more quadratic and linear modelling, where it could be like a kind of like roller coaster ride and they give you a quadratic to model it. You get more of that in Edexcel compared with AQA. AQA tends to be mostly just sine and cos waves or exponentials. Sequence is a series, pretty similar for both examples. The standard is pretty much the same. Binomial expansion, I would say Edexcel seem to ask harder binomial expansion questions in general, and I would say for something like small angle approximations, seems that AQA small angle approximations have been tougher from the ones I've seen. So I don't know, I think for the pure maths, I think Edexcel pure maths questions seems to be a bit more, don't know the word for it, a bit more mathematically demanding, but predictable. Sometimes AQA throw in these curveball questions, these kind of like curveball A-star questions that you just can't revise for and prepare for. You just have to have a brain to do them. Yeah, you don't really get that too often in Edexcel, but I would say generally the Edexcel questions are more mathematically challenging, but AQA like these random off-guard questions that will catch you off guard. Now with the applied maths, personally speaking, I just much prefer Edexcel applied maths over AQA. With mechanics, you can pretty much predict what's going to come up in Edexcel mechanics every year. If you look at the Edexcel mechanics papers, there is always a 2D variable acceleration question. There is always a 2D constant acceleration question. There's always a friction question. There is always a moments question. And there is always a projectiles question. Maybe you'll get like a mini SUVAC question at the start to make it 6 questions total, but generally it's 5 or 6 questions. It's pretty predictable what's going to come up. With AQA, it's less predictable. Different things can come up in different years. And with the statistics, again, I just much prefer Edexcel statistics. There are a lot of non-mathematical statistics questions in AQA. So as I said before, like the sampling method questions, describe how you could do a systematic sample, all that kind of stuff. You get a lot of that in AQA. You don't get anywhere near as much as that in Edexcel. Obviously, sadly, you both have large data sets you got to worry about. It's just a load of nonsense. They should get rid of it. I've said it before, it's crap. They should get rid of it because it's just absolutely pointless testing people's knowledge on a large data set that you have to learn, but what can you do? So I probably think that Edexcel pure maths is more mathematical and a bit more harder, but I think the applied maths in AQA is harder because it's just less mathematical. So look, I did maths at uni. I've been a maths tutor for 3 years. I like maths. I like doing maths. So I like doing mathematical questions. So I personally would say I prefer Edexcel for me, right? And I guess you guys as maths students, I guess you like maths. I guess you guys are good at maths. So you probably would prefer Edexcel as well. But yeah, I guess the pure Edexcel questions may be a harder standard, but it kind of cancels out with the very applied random stats and mechanics questions you get on modelling assumptions.